Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. All the wars happening around the world, and it's not just the Ukraine war which is happening. There's a lot more which is happening in terms of armed conflict across the world. There is obviously a thought process of how India must protect itself, how India must achieve its objectives, come if the balloon does go up. In that particular context, the army chief, General Naravane, had mentioned something a couple of days ago. He had said that investment in the armed forces shouldn't be seen as a burden on the economy. I have with me Lieutenant General Dushyant Singh, a noted writer and a strategic thinker about very important issues in this country. I've not had him on the show for a long time. Thank you, sir, for joining me. Very interesting subject, what the army chief actually mentioned in a statement. And especially with the war in Ukraine, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to look at our combat capability.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you for inviting me over for your show. It's been a long time, you're right.
So let me ask you this. It was a very telling statement. And I think most of the people across the country who watch military and who watch military activity understand and never would actually comment on the fact that the army expenditure, the armed forces expenditure is any sort of burden on this country. Why do you think this came out?
Well, Adi, no statement is given without a reason. In my view, probably the chief is under pressure to cut the so-called flab, especially of the Indian Army. And the reasons probably are economic in nature. If you look at the defense budget over a period of time, you will find that the army budget for modernization has been reducing gradually over a period of time. Our revenue expenditure has been rising essentially because of salaries and pensions. You'll be surprised that the pension bill is around 34% of our army budget, and the modernization budget for the army is just about 8%, and that for the Air Force is 52, and the Navy is 54%. I think somewhere down the line, there seems to be some comparisons being made between the three services, and the easiest solution which comes to the mind of the political leadership and the babus who actually go about churning finances for the three services is in the fact that, well, cut down your revenue expenditure. And how do you cut down your revenue expenditure? When you compare the manpower of the Air Force and the Navy and the Army, you will find the Army is about 12 lakh strong. So obviously, if we have to run such a large force, revenue expenditure will have to be very high. It's around 54 to 55%. So therefore, I think these pressures, and I think there is also a hidden pressure probably coming up after the Ukraine war. It translates into two ways. Firstly, is the economic factor has actually resulted in economic crisis for a number of countries around us only, and even for India, the inflation rate is going high. The price of the oil has crossed the 100 billion mark, $100 mark a long time back. So therefore, somewhere it is telling on the economy of the country also. So maybe there is a kind of a hurried push to implement proposals which would result in reduction in manpower and reduction, therefore, in the revenue expenditure, but more importantly, in the pension bills, which will essentially result in more money for modernization. And this probably is one of the major reasons. But also, I would like to highlight another factor which everybody must know. For any organization which is a military organization, the equipment profile, I'm talking of the fighting equipment profile, is normally in one third, one third, one third ratio. By that, what I mean is one third is a vintage category of equipment, one third is in the current those equipment, and the rest of the one third equipment is the state of the art equipment. But in the case of army, surprisingly, 68% of its equipment is in the vintage category. It's only balance 32% or so, which is somewhere around the current stage. I won't even call them in the current stage, except for few items in the high-tech zone. So therefore, where is the state-of-the-art equipment for our manpower to actually fight? I'm not saying that equipment is the only thing in the military war fighting, but it is an important issue and it cannot be ignored. I think these pressures have been playing on the mind of the chief when he made this statement that he's being told to cut down something which may not be actually desirable given the threats which we have. We can talk about the threats slightly later.
Well, absolutely, sir. As a matter of fact, one of the most contradictory points that you've brought across very, very clearly is with the current scenario which is around us. And we've got three countries who are pretty much on the fritz right now around the Indian neighborhood. One country is on the teetering balance edge of going into that particular position. One country, Bhutan, which is I won't call it dependent, but we need to put our forces up to protect it. And then you've got Bangladesh, which has a tumultuous border with West Bengal and multiple other places. Looking at that, I think, instead of strengthening the capability, we are talking about cutting it down. How does that make sense to you, sir? Is it dependence on other things, or how is it being envisaged?
Look, Adi, economic security and military security are like the egg and the chicken.
Yeah.
Which comes first is very difficult to actually put your finger on. If you don't have the economy, you can't have the military
Absolutely.
security. But if you don't have the military security, you can't have the economy going on its track. I'll give you three quick examples. 1971 war, we won the war comprehensively, but what happened thereafter? The country was in an economic crisis. Kargil war, we had to scramble. We had to scramble for getting our act together to get our so much so that even we had to import coffins. That was the condition of our military forces, of our army at that point in time when we were fighting the Kargil war. And you take the Ukraine war now, similar story will be emerging, and Ukraine war is going to have a much larger impact because of the oil and the gas crisis, which is a given. Despite the fact, I mean, there is a figure which I would like to quote that while the Ukrainians have been given $3 billion in aid, the West has bought $38 billion worth of oil from the Russians. So who's funding whom? One doesn't know. But it is having an overall impact in the sense people are looking for alternate sources. So if the people are looking for alternate sources, they're going to bank upon the same Saudi or the Middle East oil, from where India draws bulk of its oil and energy needs. So therefore, the prices have shot up, and rightly, we are in a problem. We are in a spot. Within 20 days, prices have risen up quite heavy. And oil and gas prices lead to inflation in other sectors as well.
Yeah.
So coming down to the threats, have our threats mitigated? If you look at our continental threats, has there been any reduction in them? If you look at the West, it continues to remain in the same vein, although people are putting a lot on the letter written by Shahbaz Sharif regarding solving the problems with peacefully and with dialogue. But I don't buy it because the trust levels between the two countries are at the lowest. I think routine formality which the Indian Prime Minister did on his taking over, and there was a kind of reciprocation from the Pakistani Prime Minister. Everybody knows that he's been the biggest supporter of harbinger of Sharif has been protecting Hafiz Saeed. So therefore, I don't see anything positive till we see it on the ground. Unless they make some positive steps on the ground, I don't think we can trust Pakistan. If you look at China, the situation is same. If you look at our internal problems, yes, there has been a downfall as far as the Northeast insurgencies are concerned. Situation is much better there. Even in the Naxal areas, barring a few incidents here and there, I think situation is quite okay. But J&K remains on top priority. So therefore, our 2.5 front remains intact. And we are not even talking about cyber threats. Recently, we had a hacking by the Chinese. There's a big article on this issue also. So these threats will continue to remain. So I don't think there is any scope for us to reduce, from the threat perspective, our defense expenditure.
Mm.
What we can do is something which we can cover later, to ensure that we get the best bang for the buck which we spend.
Absolutely. And I think that's the bottom line. There has to be a compromise. And I think, as you said, we'll take that up later, sir. Thirdly, why is there a comparison about Ukraine with India? Because there are two different dynamics altogether. Uh, Ukraine war and what war, if whenever we do fight a war with China or Pakistan or whoever it may be with, it is going to be a completely different dynamic. And how would you explain that, sir?
You see, if we compare Ukraine with India, I don't think there is any similarity in terms of the way the battles are going to unfold as far as we are concerned, and the way we are going to fight. And I'll tell you this from 2-3 points. Firstly, the terrain is entirely different in our case, so our battles are going to be different. Secondly, we do not have the luxury of the entire West coming in support of us, increasing our sustenance. Today, we have a capability of about 30 days intense rate of war fighting, and with 2.5 front threat, unless we get recouped the way they are getting recouped, I don't think we can achieve what the Ukrainians are achieving. What goes in our favor is that we have a bloodied defense forces. Our army has been in continuous battle since the last almost 3 decades, whether it is insurgency or whether we have fought the minor wars like Kargil and limited war of 1971. We have the war experience. China actually has not fought a war since Vietnam. And in Vietnam too, they got a bloody nose, actually speaking. So therefore, we have that advantage. But to say that the Ukrainian battlefield is going to, Ukrainian war is going to be a similar experience for India, I don't think we should draw the right lessons from there. We need to keep our defense forces at the levels at which we have planned it for, and the way we have planned it. We cannot be tinkering at this stage, given the threats, with the structure of the Indian Defense Forces. By that, I mean the basic structure, the recruiting, training processes which we have developed over a period of time. If we tinker with them just to save some money, we will come to grief. I mean, can you imagine if we take this tour of duty thing which is floating around in the environment? We will have 3 cycles of manpower getting inducted. So our army will be on a continuous training mode. Where is the infrastructure for the training of so many new personnel? So there'll be a batch of people going after 3 years. There'll be a batch of people going after 5 years. And there would be a batch which would be going after 15 years. So we will be only on a training mode. Where is the infrastructure? Where is the land? Where is the establishment? Won't it require more number of people to train? Where are the trainers for all these? So everything has to be thought through. It has to probably be started as a pilot project. Then let it be implemented in a particular arm. And thereafter, we have to slowly build on this issue. So therefore, I think the two things are totally different. And one more issue which I would like to tell you, different from what Ukrainians are doing and what we may have to do. See, in Ukraine, it's a war for survival existence. So every civilian there is become a soldier. Imagine a civilian fighting with a Molotov cocktail, a primitive weapon of the Second World War, or even before that. India's policy is no loss of territory. What the Ukrainians have done, they have allowed the Russians to come in, and then they are fighting a guerrilla war. Are we ready for such a war? Is it there in our strategic construct? It's there in a very, very limited manner in certain areas where we have planned to do so. But it's not like it's going to be the major strategy which the Ukrainians are having today. Today, the Ukrainians are actually fighting the war in their own country. So they are fighting it with the people, and hence they are getting that edge. Will our people be able to do a similar kind of thing? First of all, are we going to accept such a ingress into our country? So therefore, the two situations are totally different. We need of fighting forward, then we might as well be at the levels which we are. Forward fighting requires you to have the strength of the defense forces, the way we have structured ourselves, except for reorganizing. Reorientating is absolutely within the framework of future war fighting. I'm talking of theater commands, etc. That's not an issue. Integrated battle groups, etc. You're not tampering with the basic raise, train, and sustain process. So I think these are the major issues which we should take into account and not compare ourselves with Ukraine. Just because Ukraine could fight with lesser number of forces or a superpower doesn't mean that India would be able to do the same. Right?
You say they're fighting with the superpower, sir, but you know the kind of backing that they're getting in terms of intelligence, in terms of material, in terms of
Everything.
food supplies, in terms of everything. I don't see in our so many battles that we fought, anything of that sort coming in that kind of scale. They're two different games altogether, and any comparison between any war fought in India with the war being fought in Ukraine is, if I may just
Absolutely.
say this, it's absolutely in vain because
Absolutely. Imagine Putin is thinking of taking the war to the space because of the information which the Ukrainians are getting from space.
yeah.
And he intends to probably destroy a few satellites. And that's why Elon Musk is now on the target of Putin.
Starlink. He's declared war on Starlink.
Yeah. So Starlink, that absolutely. So what I'm trying to say is that the two are two different things altogether. We have to fight our own war in our own conditions with our own constraints. And the constraints are that we will not get the support what the Ukrainians are getting.
So one of the biggest things that I see of is the factor that, India today is not just another country. We want to be a global power. Any global power is measured by its military, its economy, and its diplomacy. These are the three pillars of measure of any country. A lot of people will disagree with me and say military is just this and that, but let me be very clear in putting that across. The power of the European Union today is diminished because of its bad status of the military, and that's one of the reasons why they need to, have the Americans shadow them. Any step in the reduction of fighting capability of our armed forces would reduce our, if I may use that Chinese term called, consolidated national power. How do you look at that, sir?
You're absolutely right. Two quick points on this issue. During Nehru era, we had a fantastic foreign diplomacy going on. In fact, we were one of the largest non-aligned blocs leaders in those periods. But did it stop a war with China?
Nope.
No, it did not. Moment we started building our capabilities, moment we started having the victories in our bag, 1965, you can say, was a kind of a partial victory, but 1971 was a comprehensive victory.
Yes.
So if we see that once we started bagging victories into our lap and we started becoming definitely a major military power in the region and in the world, things started falling in place. People started respecting you. I'm not saying military is the only responsible factor for a country to be taken seriously and not being tampered with, but it definitely contributes to the overall dimensions, diplomacy, information, military, economic. All these 4, 5 factors have to combine together to make the comprehensive power which a nation has to become, to have a say in the world. And it is because of this particular reason, it is because of the fact that we have focused uh, on the military in the right way, that today the leaders of the world are making a beeline for India. It's not only the economic factor. After all, our economy is just about 3 trillion. And when you compare this to the Chinese, which is around 16 trillion, or to the other nations which are smaller in size but have an economy somewhere around our levels, they're not making a beeline for Japan. They're not making a beeline for Australia. They're not making a beeline for. It's because you have the third largest defense forces in the world. It's because you can challenge China, which is the next. I won't say that it's a superpower, but it's a major military power which can challenge today the likes of even the United States of America. Uh, we are the ones which are the balancing factor today, and the military power contributes significantly to that. So therefore, I would definitely say that our military has to be retained at the levels, if not more, if not more. Just to give you some examples of how much do significant countries or significant powers spend on military. United States of America, 778 billion US dollar, 3.7% of their GDP, 3.7% of a 22 trillion GDP. Take China, $252 billion, 1.7%, but don't get carried away by this 1.7%. They have hidden expenditures which are being done to the various associated. So their actual GDP expenditure ratio of defense would be somewhere around 3%, very safely. You take India, $73 billion, just hovering around 2. At times it has gone down to 1.9. And hence, there is a need for us to. We are, of course, the third largest spender as far as, but there is a difference here as compared to China or US. We are a buyer's army. So our expenditure, which is happening for procurement,
Much
we
higher.
are getting, first of all, not the state of the art. Nobody will give you the top end technology. So you are getting your current stage technology through military, through expenditure of through economic expenditure. So therefore, our actual expenditure, in my view, if we were not a buyer's army, would be around 60 odd billion dollars only. The balance $15 billion is going into paying extra for importing defense systems. And hence the drive which I like of the government of Atmanirbharta or self-reliance, unfortunately, there is no traction. There are reasons for that. Why no traction is taking place as far as Make in India Part 1, Part 2, or now Atmanirbhar Bharat is concerned. There are some inherent weaknesses in our system, and I don't want to keep pointing every time at the long, lengthy procedures, defense acquisition procedures, Babugiri, etc., etc. So a lot of things are there. The Honda or the Toyota model for automobile production, which we have done in our country. Look at the way it has transformed the entire automobile industry of the country. We could do the same with the defense industry also. Make for India. Whether you make it here or you make it in America, it doesn't make a difference, but you make for India. We have the right over you. So maybe there is a need for us to do those small little changes. I was trying to say even UK spends 2.2%. Russia spends 4.3% of its GDP. And these are significant powers. So if we have to be counted there amongst them, and that is why the chief probably meant that with a GDP with the expenditure of 1.8 or 2.1 2.2% of your GDP, we are not going to go there,
That's true.
and therefore should not be considered as a burden. Investment should not be considered as a burden as far as defense is concerned.
That's true, sir. I absolutely, and I think you've brought out a very, very important point that is seldom said or written. The cost of acquisition. I wish that money which is spent on, and I'm not saying frivolous flights, I'm just saying important flights to the, purchasing country, the kind of RFP processes, the TADAs, the, additional expenses, the paperwork, the import costs, this, that. If we can cut that out and put that money into our own industry, I think it'll give us jobs, it'll give us more equipment and better equipment, top of the line, as you were saying, in a matter of few years. Obviously, it's not a overnight sort of a game. So, keeping that in mind, of course, what else should India do to kind of mitigate or bridge the barrier? Because economists would lead you to also understand that it's always a battle between guns and butter. uh, there is
Yes.
not always there's going to be money. We've gone through a bad pandemic. There are 50,000 reasons which we all understand. How would you kind of balance this out? What would be your suggestions?
Okay. First of all, in my view, if we have to get a balance, we need to also identify and define our problem statements correctly. Here, I would like to, I'm now going to tell something which may look outlandish, and I have not told this on any platform, but I'm doing this today just to throw this idea. Air Force spends 52% of its budget on modernization. The Navy spends 54% of its budget on modernization. I'm talking of this year's figures only. I'm not talking of, but generally, by and large, you will find that the pattern is roughly the same. Both are growing. Both the budgets are the modernization budgets are growing at around 5% and 10% annually. So therefore, there is always an increase in these. An odd year there may be a downfall, but overall it matches to around that. The army is spending around 8 to 10% every year on modernization. Has anyone ever asked that Navy and the Air Force are platform-centric forces? Who is fighting in the Air Force? These are the aerial assets, essentially, which are fighting. Who are fighting in the Navy? Essentially, the maritime assets, which are the ships and the submarines and the big ticket items are fighting, right? Operators are less, but the face is the platform. Nobody talked about the crew which went down with Mascawa. People are only talking about Mascawa went down. What happens in the case of the army? Who is fighting? It's the armor and the infantry, and it has been proven time and again. Afghanistan, you take Bangladesh, you take now Ukraine. So therefore, for the army, which is the fighting weapon? It's the armor and the infantry.
The soldiers.
So armor is a platform. So take the armor as a capital expenditure. For the infantry, which is around 60% of your overall strength of the army, who is fighting? Is the poor infantryman. He is the weapon. Why can't we define the infantry soldiers expenditure from recruitment to his retirement and pension as capital expenditure? You will find that if you define the infantry soldier as the capital expenditure, then the spending on its weapon system, spending on its fighting capabilities would also get the similar focus. Today, an infantry soldier is a revenue expenditure. I am saying make infantryman as the platform. We have to project it to the people that matter, that do not consider this as a revenue expenditure. It's a capital expenditure. Yes, but while he's delivering in the service, he's a capital expenditure.
True. Absolutely.
And then you will find that even the army would be somewhat similar in expenditure wise, and focus also would change in that case. See, infantryman is still fighting with the insals. No, people may say that it's the army guys who are to be blamed for such a thing. But who is fighting this war? Today in the insurgency, bulk of the people who are fighting are these men with the insas. With a sprinkling of AK-47s here and there, even AK-47 is a Second World War weapon. I think somewhere we have got our focus. We have to get our focus right as far as the armed forces. So first of all is we need to focus rightfully at the right places to get our expenditures correctly done. Self-reliance is good. Atmanirbharta is good and is the way to go. But you cannot at this stage strangle the defense forces. For example, the drones which were required by the army, now they have been told they will not be coming, you will take the DRDO drones. When they will come, when they will not come, I don't know. So therefore, we need to be clear as to what time, at which time, what we want immediately. So therefore, I feel prioritization has to be more realistic in nature, not emotionally bound. So once you have the your systems developed, by all means, that's the best solution. So today, in all our procurements, whether they are IDDM or buy and make or buy global and make or buy straight off the shelf parts, are not more than 50%. So therefore, we need to increase our technological threshold. It's very low. We need to increase our capacity to manufacture. We are encouraging privatization, but how much? Just by merely giving a statement that 58% of the production of the procurement will be indigenous, where is it going? Bulk of it is going to PSUs and who are producing non-essentials actually. The critical 42% or 50% is all being imported. So therefore, I think the capacities of manufacture and privatization has to be focused upon much more. The government has given, and that can only happen if you follow the American model. In the American model, design, development, and procurement is not done through an L1 process. What they do is they identify a particular firm that, okay, you will develop stealth fighters. The identification of that firm is transparent. There would be a committee, there would be a proper procedure will go through so that the corruption angle is taken out. Thereafter, there is a team working dedicated with that particular manufacturing development agency to take the whole project to fruition. Now you're dealing with one man, one agency, government, and that developer. Therefore, once the production is done, its benefits are going to come to him or to that agency. In our case, what happens? There are multiple players who will be told to do the same thing. Ultimately, what happens? There's going to be one chap who might get the contract. The others are left high and dry. Of course, they are now being given some certificate that you can also go in for manufacture and then you can import it, export it, etc. Even for that, there is a long list of clearances required before they can export their systems. So therefore, this whole thing about L1s in the defense critical equipment has to be relooked at. I think earlier we do it, the better it is for the country. The third thing, our procedures, despite two DAPs having come through, DPP 16 and then DAP 2020. You know how much time it takes for the Air Force to sign the contract? 5 years. It's and I'm not quoting from my own top of the hat. I'm talking of the demands for grant report which has come of 2022-23 very recently. It's written in that 3 to 5 years contract signing, depending on what kind of a contract you are, what kind of a weapon system you are looking at, and 3 to 5 years for delivery. So 8 years from the time you've conceived, 10 years from the time you have conceived to the delivery would imply that that system has gone vintage or it's gone beyond. It's no more the fighters which you are looking at, or it's no more the system which you are air defense systems which you are looking at that point in time. So in my view, there should be a parliamentary act passed that for defense procurement, for defense systems, uh, it has to be independent of politics. It has to be independent of parties which are coming to power. It has to be based on what is the requirement of the services. They have to be met, given within the given constraints of, once you've agreed, then it should be just followed ruthlessly without any political party interfering into it. I know that corruption, etc., is an angle which unfortunately has been riddling our country. But why so? It's because of political interference, babudams, etc., red tape. These have to be very, very strictly removed. Lengthy procedures, unwanted uh, clearances, signatures. One observation and the file comes back running. Same desk, it goes back again through the same process. You want to delay a procurement, you just say that put a observation. 3 months delay goes. I mean, it goes without saying that the file is going to be delayed by 3 to 4 months. And if you've forgotten about it, then be done with it. So these are, I think, few of the things which we need to take into account. It has to be a. It has to be a. I feel uh, on defense and national security, dil saaf rakhna padega. It cannot be hostage to politicization. National military security cannot be held hostage to politicization, irrespective of which government, which leader comes into power.
I think that's a brilliant solution, sir.
Yes, there is no other way. I don't see any other option in front of me other than an act which said that, okay, let there be a defense committee for that matter. Let that take the decision, comprising of all parties if required. If you want transparency, but once a committee gives the decision, it should be followed through.
Absolutely, I think correct me if I'm wrong. These delays also add up to the cost, because you're going over and over and over and over and over into the same thing.
What you were getting probably at $10, you will get it at $30.
Yeah,
at the time of
because it's gone up and down, up and down, up and down so many times. And apart from the fact that the logistical challenges of actually taking that damn file back to the origin country, discussing with those guys, coming back, this, that, it just is just too much. Cost cutting and cost efficiency is not bad. And there is, I think, you would also agree with me, if there are any expenses around which could be done without, fair enough, we could look at that. But it should not be at the cost of capability of our armed forces. It should not be at the cost of the fighting spirit of the armed forces, and it should not be at the cost of cutting down equipment for the armed forces. I think that's something that you brought out very, very nicely. And I don't think anybody around would be in disagreement, apart from a few sections which would bring about some illogical statement about what, I don't even get it in my mind what that statement would be right now, sir. Sir, thanks so much.
One more issue I would like to add here is,
sir, please,
that there is a need for cutting the flag, which is there in the defense force, but it has to be done correctly. There is a lot of flag floating around. Defense civilians unnecessarily being there in large numbers, they can be cut down. MES, why can't we outsource these facilities? So therefore, non-fighting elements, especially in peace stations, etc. I've been to the US and I find that all their housing projects, etc., are outsourced. An officer or a private comes there. He's a married guy. He gets a certificate from his office. He goes to that particular agency. He says, I want a house. They put him on a waiting list. If he doesn't have it, they give him a rental. He stays in the rental. That's it. Now, we spend a lot on these issues. I think barring forward areas, etc., we should just do away with them. It's high time. I mean, there's no need for having these additional expenditures, additional manpower. So these are the places where we can, I think, have a scope for cutting. Luckily, there is a committee which has been ordered, and it is looking at it. It's being headed by I think General Sheketkar, but I don't know how far it will see the light of the day. But hopefully, something should come about of the flab, and if that comes in, I think we will also reduce our revenue expenditure.
Absolutely. As I said, cost cutting is not bad. There's nothing wrong with it. It just builds up efficiency, but as long as it's not at the cost of fighting capability and equipment. So I think, an eye opener for discussion. Of course, a lot of people would not be even thinking about all these kind of things, looking at the Ukraine war and this and that, and of course the whole drama in Pakistan. But might I remind people that we still live in India and not in Ukraine or in Islamabad for that matter. We need to look at our own defenses and our own setups. India may have won a couple of diplomatic battles recently, but, and I hope I'm wrong, the big battle is yet to come. Till next time, sir, now that you've got a little bit freer, I'll, grab you in for another couple of discussions, which I've thought about. Till next time, for another subject. Jai Hind, sir.
Thank, thank you.